What do you do with your deciduous bonsai in winter? How do you prune them back? How do you wire them out? Why do you wire them out? All that in this video. Winter is the time that your deciduous bonsai should look at their best. This is the time to really admire your trees and not to put them away in a corner. This is a Deciduous maple. It's been pruned back over the summer a couple of times, and now there are some flaws that in the middle of winter you can correct. Here are 5 things to do for your deciduous bonsai in the middle of winter to make sure that they are better in the next year. Number 1. You check all the branches and you see where it needs to be pruned. Now when it comes to pruning, there are a few things that I look for. First of all, I look for anything that is dead or dying. Tips of branches that are turning grey, I remove. They are an entrance point for fungal infections, so this is a good time to clean that out. Here you see a branch that is gone white, all the way up to there. This is dead. This is not actually diabetic back. There is not a single bud in this region. That is why when I cut this branch here, it just dried in all the way to the last bud. I actually don't want a long branch in here, so I'm going to cut back even further than the last bud. There is a pair of buds here, I'm going to use that one. If you look carefully here, there is a little piece of dead material left. This is what needs to be removed. Here at the top you see the same thing. There's a little dead piece. Then I look for branches that I don't need. So I look for places where there's 2 or more side branches on the main branch. Now earlier in the year I've removed an air layer from this spot, which is why there is a branch here, 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 here and here. All these branches sprouted once I cut the top off. Now here the lowest one, there's a big branch on the back, so I don't need that. I can remove it flush with the trunk. Here there are a few side branches. This one is actually nice on an outward curve, so I'm going to remove all the other ones again flush with the trunk. Here on top there's actually this main continuation of the top, and then I would like to keep a side branch. Now this one sits a little bit to the front, but this sits nicely on the outside of the curve, going a little bit up. So this second one here I'm also just going to clip off. This one sits on the inside of this forward curve, and there are little buds on the other side, so I'm just going to remove this little branch and not going to keep it. Also because there is already a branch here. Then I have a branch here, and this will also be a good branch, and then that is a good branch. Next to that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 buds. I only want 2. In fact, I don't want to go up. I want this downward bud, this forward bud and the backward bud I also remove. More dead stuff. And here we have the same thing. This is a nice strong upward growing branch that we're going to keep. And here there are 1, 2, 3, 4 little branches and a dead piece. I am only going to keep one of the side branches here. Everything else is going to go. I don't want the one going down. I actually want to keep this one because it's a nice angle with the main branch. Everything else just like this. Now if we look here at the top of the canopy, you see this has been cut here at this point once. This is a little dead dried out branch, and then we have a 3-way split. And because we're high up in the top, this branch is quite fat, and I don't want it to fatten up anymore. Now by leaving all 3 of these branches, I'm going to get a knuckle here. I don't want that. So one of these 3 will have to go. And I always try to go for the smallest branches. So the thicker branches I take out. This way you keep a more refined bonsai tree. Now this I can with a little knife cut more smooth, but it is pretty good as it is right now. Also, I look for branches that have very, very long internodes, because on long internodes there's no side branches. So on the long term that will hamper the development of the tree. Sometimes that means that you have to remove branches that are quite old. As mentioned, anywhere where there's no buds, there will not be any side branches. So this whole area is always going to remain bare. This is the first point after this side branch where there can grow new side branches. So once you are pruning, I always select for short internodes. It is a bit of a sad thing. I would love to keep it all the way up to here, but this is just way too long to use. So I'm going to clip it off. Same for this one. These are still okay for now to build the ramification, but here again you have a very long very long section. This is still okay. This way I'm also getting the tree more or less in profile. Same here in the back. Long branches. I don't want a lot of long extension. Furthermore, there's long internodes here and also here. I'm going to cut back here to this first, but on this side branch. Similarly, this branch doesn't need to be all that long at this time. Lastly, when I go through the tree, I look for awkward branches. Branches that are in the wrong spot, have a strange shape and that cannot be corrected anymore, and those are removed as well. Now this is a very awkward branch. It comes from a bud in the back, then grows into the trunk and comes back out. I don't like awkward branches, particularly not when I'm building the tree. I can avoid problems later on by removing them in the early stages. Here for instance there's a cluster of branches and this branch is not very pretty. But this one is nice and fine. So I can take this out and just work with the tiny little side branch that sit here and wire these out into position. Note, this is also very long internodes, so I'm going to have to shorten these in a year or 2 years time. Number 2, you wire out the whole tree where it needs wire and or use tension wires to move them in place. Now wiring in winter, actually wiring in general, doesn't mean that you have to wire every single branch. Just wire those branches where you need to have some corrections made. Now maple is very sensitive to wiring, so you have to wire very loose with gentle wire. This is aluminium wire, but be careful. Particularly in winter you can't make extreme bends. So you can just gently reposition the branches, but that's about it. If you put any major force on it, the branches will snap quite easily in winter. Also, I prefer to not bend branches that are thicker unless I really have to, and I try to only wire the branches of 1 or 1.5 years old. Now, when you're bending branches, try to not just adjust the angle, but also put a little bit of sideward and up and downward motion in the branches, creating a more aged look. If you just leave the branches straight, then you only get bends at the nodes and not between the nodes, and that will look quite stiff. So you can really use this time to position the branches in a shape that makes it more elegant. And I admit that is a very difficult thing to do. This requires a lot of practice, and I'm also not the best wiring these maples. Simple corrections like this branch that goes all the way into the crown, but it's a shame to be cut off because here it would actually make a very nice branch. And as always, I wire with 1 wire on 2 branches. This way you get stability and it just looks neater. And as said, only wire if you want to make a correction, so there's no need to go all the way to the end of every single little branchlet. The tree generally knows how to grow. And I'd like to bring this branch down more into a downward angle, but I don't want to use heavy wire here on this branch because it will scar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little guy wire. So I'm going to take a little wire hook and hook it through the drainage hole at the bottom of the pot. And once that is done, I can use the hooked wire, if it is long enough, yes it is, to just gently hold the branch down. Even though it is a little light hook, I now know it works. Put a little bit of rubber tubing here, so there's less pressure on the branch itself. And of course now I can readjust the side branches to still have a nice, gentle, upward looking profile. Number 3, you make a long-term plan for your tree for the next season. You decide what needs to grow out and what has time. You decide what needs to be pruned out, what needs to be taken off, can I air layer, and maybe do I need to repot it? And the reason is quite simple. Right now you can see the tree, you know what needs to be done, and maybe you have some big branches that you want to cut off. Now right now is not an optimal time to say cut a branch here. That is something to really be done later in the year, but now is the time that you can decide that this needs to be done. So look critically at your tree, decide where you want it to go in the next year, and then mark the branches that you think need major work. Now this needs heavier wire. So this tree next year, it needs to be repotted. So a lot of the substrate here has been eaten out by the birds. Next to that I'm going to let this top grow out. Not going to air layer the new top. So I'm going to prune back this side a couple of times over the next year. But besides that, next year there's not a lot of special things that need to happen to this tree. Now you can see what a gentle wiring does to these branches. It creates a little bit more movement and direction in them. And I need to be careful that this all comes together, which is a lot better visible from the camera perspective. And that actually brings me to number 4. You take a picture of your tree and you correct any mistakes that you've made, and I'll explain to you why that is important. Now a tree is a 3-dimensional object and our eyes are really good at detecting the dimensions of the tree and the depth. However, a picture is not capable of doing that, and therefore a picture works so well to see what mistakes you've made and what you still need to correct. So use that ability of your camera to capture flaws in your tree. If it doesn't look good in a picture, there probably is something wrong. Now I'm not done with wiring. This is one of the branches that I need to wire that I feel is already quite thick. And I know a lot of people will say it is not thick at all. It's still thin, but I do think it's thick. And what I do with thicker wires, after I anchor it on a side branch, I like to just wire the branch with the branch already in place. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll bring it all the way up to the place where I need to start wiring the branch. Then I'll take the branch and I'll bring it up. And then I put the wire around it. This way the wire puts a more even pressure on the bark, holding it up. Or at least that's what I think. And again, try to use very loose coils. Now I don't need a lot of movement. I just want it upward. This is all that is needed for this branch right now. Now if I take a picture of the tree, what you'll see is that here this branch interacts with the branch behind it. Even though here it looks nice and structured, on a picture it looks really awkward. And one of the main solutions that I have for that, I'm just going to take it out. Because the tree apparently doesn't need the branch. Now it is open again, you can look through and you see this much more in the background. But even so, this could do with a little bit of wire. Now let me continue wiring this out. And typically pruning and wiring for me goes hand in hand. Right, so you have wired the tree out. It's been pruned back. You've made a plan for next year. You've taken pictures, you've made corrections on the mistakes of your tree. And then, what did we say? Let's make a plan for next year. Number 5, decide whether you like the pot or select another pot for the next season. Now this pot is a pot by Erin, and that is Vic Harris in the UK. I really like the pot, but not for this tree. It is however nice and deep. It is quite wide. So for development of this tree, it is the right pot because it looks better than a plastic pot, but it is oversized for this tree and therefore this tree can quite easily grow out more. Now I am going to take it out of the pot in spring, prune the roots, replant it and help the Nebari develop. But that is all I'm going to do on the pot this year. I think with that we are done styling this tree. We are done with this video. I wish you a very pleasant winter. Keep one thing in mind. If you do this sort of work and it is freezing, you can lose branches. So this tree, it can go outside because winter is, well, it's only a few degrees above freezing at the moment. So it is not warm, but it's warm enough for this tree to not have any problems with this work. But if you're in a frosty period, don't do this work or keep it frost free. You can, of course, what I do mostly with my trees that I want to wire out, I keep them frost free. I keep them in a shed until I've worked on them, and then another month or so I make sure that they don't expose to any frost. During that time the branches can adjust to the new positions, the cells can correct themselves, and then if the frost comes it is allowed to freeze again. But best is to not let it freeze over too much directly after wiring in the middle of winter because the tree is not active. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. See you next time.